Hi, I'm Forrest Gander, a North American writer and translator with a degree in geology and a long-term interest in ecology. I live in a small unincorporated rural town north of San Francisco, California, a 6-hour drive from the Mojave Desert where I was born. As a translator, I've focused on Japanese and Spanish language poetry, although I've translated books by writers from Spain, Chile, Bolivia, and Argentina. I've been especially interested in the poetry of the generation of women who came of age in the late 60s and 70s in Mexico after the Tlatelolco Square massacre, and when, with the bloom of independent presses, women began to publish each other as a means of sidestepping the conventional patriarchal literary structures from which they'd been routinely excluded. One of these women is Coral Bracho, who has been since her first book a figure of enormous influence not only in Mexico but internationally. I've translated a selected poems, Firefly Under the Tongue by Bracho, and most recently a discrete book, It Must Be a Misunderstanding, focused on her mother's dementia. I chose to translate this whole book rather than another selected volume, because although composed of individual poems, It Must Be a Misunderstanding is really a deeply affecting book-length work whose force builds as the poems cycle through their sequences. The so-called plot follows a general trajectory from early to late Alzheimer's, with non-judgmental affection and compassionate watchfulness. We come to know an opinionated, demonstrative, elderly woman whose resilience in the face of her dehiscent memory becomes most clear in her adaptive strategies. The poems involve us in the mind's bafflement and wonder, in its creative quick-change adjustments, and in the emotional drama that draws us across the widening linguistic gaps that reroute communication. One of the things I most admire about Coral Bracho's work is how her style changes from book to book. There are, to be sure, consistent elements. For instance, in all her work, sensual, sometimes erotic particulars punctuate the conceptual inquiries concerning space and time, memory, and the interrelation of self and environment. To wit, she constantly interrogates the perceiving consciousness. But she's retooled her lexical and syntactical palette repeatedly since the publication of the early books that made her famous and gave her a reputation as a neo-Baroque poet. She didn't want to get stuck in her early style. She didn't want to merely repeat her successes. Instead, she resolutely insisted on expanding her repertoire of techniques and approaches to the poem. She was, you might say, more like Bob Dylan than John Ashbery in this respect. For a while, she stripped out the rich, lusciously musical qualities of the early books. She explored more subtle, restrained phrasings. She collaborated with artists. She wrote phenomenological poems about the space of a room, about the town of Marfa, Texas. The diction of her poems shifted from the ecstatically ornate agua de medusas, agua láctea, sinuosa, agua de bordes lúbricos, espesura vidriante, deliquescencia entre contornos deleitosos, water of jellyfish, lacteal sinuous water, water of lubricious borders, glassy thickness, deliquescence and delectable contours, to the gnomic, clipped declarations of la piedra que va a caer cambia el pozo, y el agua que inexorablemente en su ascenso la alteran. The rock about to fall alters the well, and the water that inexorably, as it drops, alters it. In the recent It Must Be a Misunderstanding, Bracho is still exploring the perceiving consciousness, not only her own, but her elderly mother's as well. Readers navigate shifting points of view. Now we're inside the head of someone losing their memory. Now we're observing from a distance. Now we're overhearing conversations within a room or within a mind. Here's one of Bracho's philosophical serial observations of her mother's mental state. The puzzle pieces get lost, but not the look she knows to be hers. The forms, the objects, they merge, they crumble, but a feeling for the ensemble remains. Between moments, between fictions, despite constant fractures, like a threshold, a handhold. And here's a portrait of Bracho's mother as revealed in her creatively evasive conversation with her doctor. Alzheimer's follow-up. Who is the president of this country? Well, it depends. For some it's one person, for others it's someone else. What is this called? I don't know, doctor, because I don't use that. Only you do. How many children do you have? Quite a few. What did you used to do? Now you're going to ask me to draw a clock. Did you like to dance? Yes, of course I danced. And did you ever travel? Yes, naturally. Where to? Well, to the same place everyone went. I hope you enjoy this book.